Have you ever been treated as if you didn't belong somewhere, even though you did everything right to get there? Have you ever felt that awkward silence where nobody defends you, but everyone watches? This story is for those who have had to assert themselves without raising their voice, who know the weight of staying calm when everything around you is trying to push you out. And if you've ever gone through something like this, or know someone who has, leave in the comments where you're watching. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Stories like this don't come around every day, and you won't want to miss the next ones. The flight departed from Chicago, crossing the country all the way to San Francisco. It was the end of a long, intense, pressure-filled week. Jordan Ellis, a 38-year-old black woman and strategy manager at a global energy company, had just closed an international deal that had been on the table for nearly a year. It was the first time she'd led a round like that on her own, and she succeeded. But no one on the plane knew any of that. To the other passengers, she was just another woman in business class. White sneakers, navy blue blazer, headphones hanging around her neck, tired but satisfied look. She hadn't even taken her laptop out of her bag. She just wanted a few hours of peace before the next meeting. Jordan always paid for flight upgrades with her own card. It was her way of treating herself. An aisle seat, extra legroom, a bit more. Quiet. Nothing extravagant. Just the basics to take a deep breath after so much effort. She was already buckled in when a white man in his early 50s stopped beside her. The way he glanced first at the seat and then at her was quick but pointed, as though something wasn't where it belonged. She noticed but pretended not to. He muttered something to the flight attendant and pointed. The attendant checked his ticket, then looked at Jordan and said with a practiced smile that the seat was indeed hers. The mix-up seemed settled, but it wasn't. He wouldn't accept it. With a clenched jaw and a forced smile, he said there must have been a mistake. Then he tried to soften it by claiming he was having a stressful day and needed that seat to review documents before an important presentation. "Would you mind swapping with me?" he asked, as if doing her a favor. Jordan looked him square in the eye. Her voice was low, firm, unhurried. "I'd rather stay where I am, thank you." His smile vanished. Instantly, he turned to the flight attendant and began speaking louder, citing his elite status, calling himself a frequent flyer who deserved better consideration. Heads began to turn, and suddenly, Jordan ceased being just another passenger and became the woman in the wrong seat. The attendant looked uncomfortable. She glanced between the man and Jordan, as if searching for a solution that would offend no one, but it was clear who she was trying to avoid confronting. Perhaps you could consider switching just to make things easier," she offered in an almost whisper, with a nervous smile. Jordan didn't reply immediately. She took a deep breath, looked around. A middle-aged woman in the next row pretended to read, but her eyes were glued to the scene. A man in a three-piece suit scrolled slowly through his phone, as if trying to look busy, yet watching all the same. Jordan replied calmly, still without raising her voice, "I paid for this seat. I'm fine here." There was no aggression in her tone, but the atmosphere grew as heavy as if there had been. The man stepped back and placed his hands on his hips. "This is ridiculous. I'm a gold medallion member. I've had status with this airline for years. I should be here." The words hung in the air like a silent slap. No one said a thing, but everyone heard. A young blonde crew member approached with tentative steps. He looked green, maybe on one of his first long-haul flights. "Ma'am, maybe, if it's not too much trouble, could you consider switching just this once?" His expression was pleading, not for justice, but for peace. Inside, Jordan felt that familiar knot tighten in her chest. It wasn't the first time she'd been expected to give in to avoid trouble. She remembered the Dallas meeting when a senior executive ignored her until he saw her badge. She remembered the interview where they asked if she'd really worked in energy before. She didn't shout. She didn't justify herself. She simply said, "I'm fine. Right here, thank you." But this time, as she spoke, she discreetly unlocked her phone, opened a secure app, and sent a brief message. "Seat dispute. Flight 7823, SFO, inappropriate conduct. Documenting." Then she took off her headphones, placed them in her lap, and crossed her arms. The man huffed. The attendant stepped away. The young crew member lingered for a moment, then retreated to the back of the cabin. For a moment, everything went back to normal, or so it seemed. The plane continued, airborne, but the atmosphere around Jordan felt dense. She didn't sleep, not from fear, but because she stayed alert. She knew how quickly things could shift. She knew that depending on how someone interpreted the situation, she could be labeled a problem. So she maintained her posture, her steady gaze, her hands in plain sight. At the back of her mind, she recalled a conversation with a college friend. Sometimes being strong means appearing cold. It's the price of not letting yourself be bent. And that night, Jordan's strength was silence. During the scheduled layover in Denver, the plane remained on the ground longer than expected. Vague announcements about technical adjustments were made, and some passengers complained about the delay. Jordan, however, was not surprised. She kept her eyes on the flight information screen, but her thoughts were elsewhere, in the closed circle of legal executives at her company and in the quiet network of contacts she had cultivated over the years. 25 minutes after landing, a man in a dark suit wearing the airline's badge entered through the front door. He spoke briefly with the cabin chief, who turned pale at the sight of him. Then they both walked toward the back, where Jordan sat, motionless, serene, but with a gaze that said, "I see everything." The manager approached the man who had caused the commotion. Their conversation was low but firm. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. The passenger tried to justify himself, laughed nervously, gestured toward Jordan with an almost imperceptible nod, but the manager didn't react. He just listened and then motioned for the attendant to come over. They moved aside for a private talk. When they returned, the manager looked directly at Jordan and with a restrained nod said, "Ms. Ellis, on behalf of the airline, I would like to apologize for what happened. We will take internal measures." There were no spotlights, no announcement over the PA, but each word was like a brick laid where there had previously been only silence. The remainder of the flight passed in a contained atmosphere. The younger attendant, who had earlier asked Jordan to switch, now avoided any eye contact. The man stayed silent, face red, body hunched in his new seat a few rows back. Jordan didn't move, nor did she smile. There was no victory to be had, only the exhaustion of another battle she never should have had to fight. Yet she knew each of these small struggles was part of something larger, and at that moment she felt she had acted with the firmness her mother had taught her as a child. Never let anyone take you away from where you have the right to be. When she disembarked in San Francisco, Jordan ignored the man's gaze as she passed him in the aisle. She didn't respond to the cabin chief's embarrassed greeting. She simply walked to the exit, as she always did, with her back straight, steps calm, and her silent carry-on rolling behind her. On her phone, she received a confirmation from the legal team. Incident logged, airline board notified, action in progress. It was the end of a turbulent flight, but the beginning of something that could change entire policies. And it all started with a soft-spoken "no," said with dignity. In the silence of her San Francisco hotel room, Jordan couldn't shut her body down. She was exhausted, but there was something lodged in her chest, a tension that sleep couldn't soothe. She sat on the edge of the bed, slowly spinning her phone in her hands. The message from the legal team was still open, alongside a missed call notification from a college friend, Andrea, who now also held an executive position at another energy firm. Jordan hesitated before calling back. She knew that if she picked up, she would break down, and she didn't want to be vulnerable, not yet. She decided to go to the bathroom, wash her face, and face the mirror. But what she saw wasn't just tiredness. It was the reflection of someone weary of having to prove herself, even at 30,000 feet. She sat again on the bed, this time with her head against the wall, eyes wandering over the textured ceiling. The air conditioner hummed low, and the sounds of the city began to filter through the window crack. For a moment she was back in her high school cafeteria, where a teacher had once asked, in front of everyone, if she really belonged in the advanced science group. She remembered laughing it off, pretending not to care, and telling her mother that night. "This will happen many times," her mother had said, tears in her eyes but her voice steady. "But every time you don't lower your head, you teach someone else to see differently." At the time, Jordan hadn't grasped how heavy that was. Today, she understood perfectly. The next morning, she woke up before her alarm. She showered on autopilot, put on her blouse like it was armor, and went down for hotel breakfast. She ate almost nothing, but the mere act of being there, in public, standing tall, felt almost like a manifesto. As she sipped her black coffee, she got a brief call from her company's legal department confirming that the airline board had been notified and that Jordan herself would be kept updated. "You have no idea how powerful this is," her lawyer said before hanging up. Jordan stared at the dark screen of her phone for a few seconds, then tucked it away and left for the headquarters meeting as if headed into battle. Not with weapons, but with presence and story. In the glass and steel corporate building, the elevators reflected the ceiling's white lights and the polished shoes of executives. Jordan entered the conference room with steady, determined strides. Some colleagues greeted her with more attention than usual. One of them, who rarely acknowledged her presence, even remarked, "I heard about what happened on the flight. I'm impressed by your composure." She only smiled politely. It wasn't something to celebrate, because deep down, she knew that if she'd been any other passenger, nobody would have suggested she switch seats. Nobody would have doubted that seat belonged to him. What they called composure was, in fact, survival, something she'd been honing since adolescence. The meeting lasted nearly 4 hours. Jordan presented data, countered objections firmly, and made clear why her team had hit targets no one expected. She didn't mention the flight or what happened the night before, but every word she spoke, every chart she presented, carried something beyond logic. It carried the truth of someone who wasn't just doing her job well. She was carving a path in ground that was never neutral. When she finished her portion, a few colleagues offered light applause, which was unusual in that environment. One of the directors approached at the end and whispered, "Keep it up. You belong exactly where you are." Jordan thanked him, but inside, the phrase sounded strange. She didn't want to be where she deserved. She wanted to be where it was normal for her to be. On the ride back to the hotel, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky a metallic orange. San Francisco traffic crawled by, and she gazed out the taxi window as if trying to organize the jumble of thoughts swirling in her mind. As much as she was used to tension, that day felt different. Not because of the meeting itself, she'd come prepared for that, but because behind every interaction there lay an invisible layer of scrutiny. They didn't know how to name what they felt, but they knew Jordan wasn't ordinary, and that for many was uncomfortable. She sensed it in the way some people avoided meeting her eyes, in the excessive formality, in the sudden caution in offering praise or dissent. As soon as she stepped into the room, she kicked off her shoes and collapsed into the armchair. She opened her laptop, but not to work. She needed to write, something she did rarely, only when she needed to hear herself. She typed a simple sentence, which began, "Today I remained seated, and that was enough to make the world tremble, even if just a little." She paused, deleted, rewrote. Finally, she closed the computer. She didn't need to share it with anyone. Not yet. But she needed to remember, because the next day, when everything went back to normal and polite smiles hid the real discomfort, she wanted to recall that there was a moment when simply existing was an act of resistance. Later, she ordered room service. While waiting, she decided to respond to the airline's email. She wasn't aggressive, she didn't mock. She wrote with the precision of someone who knows exactly the power of words. "Thank you for your response. I hope the commitment to training and protocol review is taken seriously. Many passengers, like me, travel with the expectation of simply reaching their destination. What I experienced should not be part of the journey." She signed with her full name and title. She considered sending it anonymously, but chose not to hide. She had been invisible enough in her life. Now she wanted to be seen, completely. After dinner, she called her mother. She didn't tell her everything. She only said that the day had been long but productive. Her mother, with that calm voice that always traveled miles, replied, "You know what's beautiful, my daughter. You became the woman I dreamed you'd be, and more." Jordan didn't know what to say. She simply closed her eyes and smiled with a lump in her throat. Deep down, she knew that phrase was worth more than any apology, more than any new policy, because to her mother she didn't need to prove anything, and maybe, one day, the world would understand that too. Weeks later, Jordan received an unexpected call from the airline's compliance department. It wasn't just to thank her for her cooperation, as she'd expected. It was to inform her that her account had prompted an extraordinary meeting with representatives from multiple departments: legal, customer service, cabin, security, and HR. The incident she lived through, although it hadn't made the news or gone viral on social media, sparked serious internal changes. It was how you handled everything, the clarity, the silent firmness. It forced us to look inward, said the woman on the other end of the line. Jordan simply listened. She didn't respond with excitement or cold detachment. She just absorbed it. She was too tired for hollow celebrations, but knowing that something concrete had changed, even if only a bit, felt like breathing slightly less heavy air for a few seconds. Soon afterward, an official notice was published on the airline's internal portal. New guidelines would be implemented for crew training, with a special focus on unconscious bias, conflict resolution, and respectful passenger interactions. One paragraph cited, without names, recent cases in which customers were unacceptably embarrassed due to snap judgments and subjective assumptions. Jordan read the document while sipping coffee in her office. She didn't feel vindicated. It wasn't about that. It was about ensuring that future Jordan Ellises wouldn't have to justify their presence at every turn. It was about normalizing what should be obvious. Life went on. The company where Jordan worked began an international expansion process, and she was promoted to Director of Strategy for North America. The offer came with a significant salary increase, a new office overlooking the city, and her own team. But what moved her most was the handwritten letter she received from a younger black intern who had attended one of her internal presentations months later. "Seeing you sit at that table made me realize I can get there too. Thank you for existing as you are." Jordan held the letter with trembling hands, feeling a mixture of gratitude, memory, responsibility, and pride that's hard to explain. No award in the world could compare to that. One afternoon, boarding another flight, this time to a conference in New York, Jordan settled into seat 3C in business class. As she organized her documents on the tray table, a well-dressed white man stopped beside her. For a second, she felt that old chill in her stomach, but he only smiled and said, "Oh, sorry, my seat is 4C, I'm one row back." She returned the smile. "It happens." Then she went back to her papers. The world hadn't completely changed, but new cracks had formed in its structure, and sometimes that's how change begins, not with earthquakes, but with small silent shifts. During the flight, gazing out the window, Jordan thought of her younger self, the girl who stayed quiet not to be a bother, who shrank when asked to make things easier, who smiled out of politeness while being pushed out of spaces she had every right to occupy, and she thought about how on that particular day she didn't budge, not out of stubbornness, but because she had learned that standing your ground can be as powerful as resistance, and that sometimes the real revolution isn't in shouting at the world, but in refusing to leave a place you've earned. Before landing, she typed a quick note in her phone's notepad. "Today, no one needed to know my name to respect me, but if they want to know, I'm ready." She saved it, locked the screen, and took a deep breath. When the plane touched down, Jordan had not only reached another destination, she had left, on that flight, a silent reminder for everyone around her. Authority doesn't need to shout. It just needs to exist with firmness. And in that moment, between the screech of the brakes and the crew's announcements, she knew, with the same certainty that kept her in that seat, that she wasn't just making history. She was the story itself.